So the story is based on an unpublished short story by Seton I. Miller and S.S. Field called Pete's Dragon and the USA, and they sold it to Walt Disney in 1957. Now originally Walt had wanted Kevin Corcoran to be the child actor for this, who's also in Old Yeller, so definitely stay tuned for that video. But he decided that it fitted much better for his Disneyland anthology program, with plans to make this a 2-part episode the following year. So even though filming was already scheduled and they already had a first draft of the script, Walt Disney was still quite unsure about this, and so he put the film in turnaround, which in layman's terms basically means he put the film on ice. Fast forward now a decade, so this is 1968, and so Walt Disney had obviously died the year before, and this now was finally the time when you had 2 writers who came forward and they started to try and write a script for this film. So this is now the second script for Pete's Dragon. So although the writers presented the idea to the studios, it was decided once again that it was going to be put in limbo, until 1975 when producer Jerome Cortland ended up rediscovering the project and he hired Malcolm Morgenstern to rewrite the script. So Morgenstern is the one who's changed the setting of it from being a contemporary one to being a period setting. And he also is the one who decided that Elliot should be a real dragon instead of an imaginary one. So within the studios there ended up being a huge debate raging about just how visible Elliot should be, until Ken Anderson lobbied for him to be mainly visible throughout the story, and this was because he argued that the audience would lose patience if he was only visible for a limited amount of time, which Malcolm later ended up conceding and said that actually, you know what, this is meant to be a film for the kids, and actually if the kids can't see Elliot for most of it, then it's not actually going to be that useful. And also we should note that Elliot was named after Elliot Gould, who's an old friend of Malcolm Morgenstern, and we should also note that the town was named after a real Native American tribe that lived in Maine, and this was of course
I know.
Now that covers the story of the creative process, but now we have to talk about the story of the studio. So the music was done by Al Kasher and Joel Herschel, and it was directed by Don Chaffee. So he's the same person who directed Jason and the Argonauts and also 1 Million Year BC. So he had experience of things being animated and also special effects within the films. Also as well, we should note that the animators made a purposeful decision that Elliot should actually be a more westernized dragon. The reason being is because in the West, dragons are seen as basically scary animals, whereas in Eastern mythology, they are seen as more friendly. And so basically a lot of the drama and a lot of the kind of conflict within this story mainly comes from the fact of people thinking that Elliot is a scary dragon. So again, if it was more Eastern, it wouldn't have necessarily had the same effect. Also as well, we should say that this was the very first film in which none of Disney's 9 old men did any part of the animation. So many of them had died by this time or else had retired. And so this film here, the animation was predominantly done by Don Bluth, so he was the animating director. Again, we covered him more in our last video. Definitely check out the biography of Don Bluth. And also we should say finally with regard to the animation that Ken Anderson, he is the reason why Elliot is very clumsy within this. And again, this is for comedic effect, and obviously it helps to pad out the runtime quite a bit, but also is quite central within the story as the reason why many of the townsfolk are hostile towards Pete, and then later when they find out it's Elliot, they're also quite hostile to Elliot. And we should also say with regard to Elliot being animated, that there were 3 layers of animation for this. So much in the same way as you had for Mary Poppins, you'd basically have, say for instance, you have Pete, then you have Elliot, then you have the background. So the 3 layers of the images would be put over each other, and this is how they were able to actually animate the film. Now talking about the casting for the film, so you have Helen Reddy, who is the one who plays Nora, and she, outside of the world of film, was mainly known as a singer. Next you have Jim Dale, who's the person who plays Dr. Terminus, and he was most known in many of the Carry On films. Next you have Mickey Rooney, who is the person who plays Lampy, and he is best known for his part in It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World. Next you had Red Buttons, who is the person who plays Hoagie, and he was just quite a minor actor. And next we should say that Lena, who is the mother of the Gogan family, she is played by Shelley Winters, So she is best known in the film Lolita, and also in Alfie and many other films, in particular within the 1960s. And then also we should say that Pete is played by Sean Marshall. And also we should say that one of the Gogan boys was played by Jeff Conaway. So he is one of the people who's in Grease, so that's probably where he's best known in. Although the fact he's wearing so much makeup in this would mean that it's probably quite hard for one to recognise him. And finally, we should say that the voice of Elliot is done by Charlie Callis. So he was a comedian, and he was most known for working with Jerry Lewis and with Dean Martin back in the 1950s. So that covers the casting of the film. And now we have to talk about the themes and the history. So, of course, first of all, the major theme of this is one which recurs many times within Disney films, and this is to do with, basically the main stars not being believed. So whether it's children or whether it's animals, etc., the main thing in this is a thing of not being believed. So even Nora, who's obviously quite close to him, it's not till the very, very end that she finally ends up seeing with her own eyes, and that's when she actually believes in Elliot. But none of them just believe on the face of it, even though Pete is obviously in the right. And also as well, we should say that there's the theme of greed, which is shown many, many times. So whether this is Dr. Terminus and Hoagie, who are just focused on money, money, money by the pound, or whether it's the Gogan family, who don't talk about how they missed the boy, etc. It's just the fact of, they spent $50 on him plus legal fees. And this is a line which is said repeatedly throughout this. And actually, in both cases of, Dr. Terminus and Hoagie, and also for the Gogan family, they make songs about how much they care about money. And also as well, we should say, this film here is very typical of films from the 1970s onwards, and this is because it's very inclusive. So first of all, as well, you can see with many of the actors in this, they're obviously African American, and although this is set in New England, they have black people in it and stuff, which is, if this film was done maybe a decade or two before, they just wouldn't have had people in there like that. And also as well, we should say, actually, before I kind of get onto that, why is it that the Gogan family are rednecks? Like, they have southern accents, even though it's meant to be in New England. That's just something which I have to kind of say doesn't make much sense. But anyway, right, in terms of tolerance and inclusion, it's also is a thing where basically, if you look at the song to do with there's room for everyone in this world, that there is very kind of hippie-ish kind of song. It's a very kind of, let's everyone all hold hands. And again, if this film came out in 1957, as was originally planned, would this song have actually featured in that? Probably not. Because at that time, obviously, America was very divided over the issue of segregation and was not very inclusive at all. But by 1977, the society had moved significantly towards that. So even though they're just talking about a dragon in this, actually the message of there's room for everyone in this world, it's kind of, it kind of is very much in keeping with the times.